All right. Well, before I get into this, has anybody read this book? Okay. Well, that's cool. It was one of my favorites of last year. We'll get into why. But even more so, how about this? Have you ever had a conversation, and you can maybe give a thumbs up in the chat or a +1 or whatever you like. Have you ever had a conversation where you were with somebody or a group and you just felt really totally connected? You felt understood and you were like, wow, yes, like they get me. Yes. Has anybody felt that? I'm just so curious, and I hope everybody has. Oh, Alex, were you hopping in? Yeah, good, thanks. Because in reading this book and thinking about this, I'm like, wow, those moments are magical to me. They feel really great. And I like to think, imagine if we could create those moments in our conversations, if we had the skills to create these really deeply connected moments where we were felt, we were understood, and we understood others. And the research in this book shows that it is possible to do that. It is possible to create these moments where we just really get people and people get us. And that, I think, is where those magical moments can happen, those moments of just creativity, excitement, innovation. And I think there's so much power in that concept. And I don't know about you, but I wasn't taught a lot about communication when I grew up. I know there's probably a lot of like ways and methods, and maybe in schools now they teach it a bit more, but I wasn't taught much of that growing up. And I don't know if there's a whole lot of places where we can learn this. So as I said, I love taking concepts from books and being like, well, how do we practice this? And so towards the end, I'll talk about some resources where you can take some of these little tidbits and try them. And in doing this, when I set these up, when I create these kind of presentations, I do it myself. And I can tell you, I have worked on and tried a bunch of these things that we're going to go over, and it has been powerful. I have had a conversation with somebody who I normally would probably fight with, and we got somewhere, and it's been powerful. So yeah, let's get into it. Okay, so there was a study that this book references as one of the primary, it's kind of the primary influence of this book. And so it was done by this person named Bo Sievers, who is a neuroscientist. And what they did was they hooked up participants to a brain scanning system. And they had them watch like ambiguous movie scenes by themselves. They were movie scenes that didn't really have audio, they were silent, and they measured their brain activity. Then they got those same people into a room, still hooked up to these brain scan devices, and they had them discuss what they saw, what their experiences were. And they continued to kind of read their brain activity. And they found that in some of these groups that people were really kind of connected and engaged and really having a really powerful and strong and deep conversation. There was an outlier. And they called these outliers a superconnector. And essentially what these people did, they found in this group, was what we know of people that have good communication skills. They listened, they asked a lot of questions, they didn't speak a lot, they listened to other people. But there was one thing that they did differently and that really stood out, and that was a core component of the influence of this book. And that was that they would identify and match the mindset of the other people in the group. And we'll go into that. And what they found is that when they did that, these people's brain patterns literally aligned along with some of their other physiological components, like their heartbeat and heart patterns aligned when they had one of these people in the room who was not only listening, not only asking questions and being curious, but also matching where the other person was. And I was like, wow, this is like so fascinating to me. And so that's what I get at when I talk about like, oh wow, this science has proved that this can be done. And we'll get into some of the skills on how to do that. But yeah, I thought this was really fascinating. And what was also surfaced in this conversation was what they call the 3 mindsets. And so this is kind of some of the core work we'll go into, along with a couple of other things. But the idea here is what was found in the study along with this superconnector conversation, what that was that typically when a conversation was happening, it, for the most part, fell into three different buckets, I will call them, three different kinds of conversations. Now, this doesn't mean that every conversation you have will fall into one of these three buckets, but a very high percentage based on this study would fall into this bucket. So we'll go into them now, and then we'll go into some of the details around them. So one of the mindsets or conversation styles, if you might want to call it like that, they called it, what is this really about? And this is a conversation where it's a decision-making conversation. It's practical. Someone is coming and saying, hey, I'm having a problem perhaps. How do I fix this? Can you give me advice? I'm looking for some ideas here. How can you help me? The next conversation style or mindset, as they call them, was how do we feel? It's an emotional conversation. Hey, I'm feeling really upset. Hey, something happened. And I think I saw Wendy smile here when it was like, I have so many, just these two, right? Just these two conversation styles alone. You can imagine how much mismatch happens here. And I specifically think about relationships, right? I can't tell you how many times my partner has come to me and wanted to share her feelings. And I went into, well, let's do something about this. And that is a mismatch, right? We were definitely not aligning our brain patterns and our heart patterns on that. And so I think that's fascinating to think about. And then the final one, and this one's a little more nuanced, is called Who Are We? And we're gonna get into this one a little more deeply because this is around identity. Who are we? Hey, maybe I'm a parent. What does being a parent mean to me in this situation? And when we get into disagreements and difficult conversations, it can very often be around this bucket here because I'm coming to the table, maybe it's politics. Maybe I'm saying, hey, I'm a Democrat, I'm a Republican. And what does that mean to me in terms of my identity? And what does that make you think about me? And so, again, while not every single one of our conversations is going to fall into these three buckets, the study says that a lot of them will. And so the idea here is if we can be aware that, hey, in a lot of conversations, these are how people are going to be coming to us, that we now have an awareness and the ability to kind of better align. And we'll go into that a little more detail right now. So the first step is awareness, right? How now that we know that this study says this is likely what a conversation might look like, what did each of these look like? So the first is that decision-making practical conversation. You might see some language around, hey, I want to solve this. Can you give me some assistance with this? Hey, what do you think our options are here? And yes, it's practical. We're planning. We're having a process here. And you know there might be questions about how do we do things, logistics. With the how do we feel conversation, I think it might be pretty clear, but it's what I just shared before. Hey, I'm feeling X. I'm worried about this, and it might be a little more nuanced because it might be being like, hey, I'm upset, or this feels unfair, and yeah, and there might be body language signals here. There might be, I mean, I feel like as humans, we can somewhat detect, hey, something's going on here, right? And they're feeling a certain way. And then finally, with the social side, it's, hey, as a leader, we typically do things this way. In my family, we've always done this, and typically in these, it's our identity can affect how others see us and how we see other people. It can be like a tribal type of language. So again, when we're looking at this concept of the mindsets, the idea here is to, now that kind of we're aware of some of the primary ones that we're going to see, we can start to notice them in conversation. We can start to identify them. And that is the first step in helping to align our conversations so we don't miss each other. Quick call out here, another book. Yeah, and like I said, Alex, all of these I'll share. Really important to call out as we get a little deeper here. This book I actually read this year. It's not new, but it was a really fascinating book by Malcolm Gladwell around, as human beings, we think we know what people are going through. We look at body language, we look at behavior, and we think, oh, I know what's going on here. Our brains try to process it, and we think we have a good idea of what's happening and where someone is. When in fact, we are more than 50% wrong. So I think it's really important to call out that when we're trying to identify where people are, what mindset, if you will, it's really important to call out that guessing is not a good idea. Like, we really need to do some work to uncover it. Like, we can try to identify it and guess, and that's fine. But where I'm going with this is the best way to do it is to ask. And this slide's very word heavy. You don't have to read it. This is included in some of the resources I'll share out after this. But hey, you know, if you don't know, you just ask. Hey, I'm wondering where you are right now. Are you looking for ideas? Are you looking for me to help give you advice? Or you just want me to hear you out? Are you wanting to talk about how who you are is affecting something with you right now? And so, yeah, it could look like, you know, if you're kind of guessing, hey, I'm thinking maybe that you're wanting advice, but actually, is that correct? Maybe you want me to just listen, and just some examples around how we can really align with where somebody is just by asking. And it might be a simple concept, but I think it's really important to call out. And again, this is very word heavy slide, so no need to look at this. As we go forward, once we might have identified where someone is or the mindset that they're in, then we can work towards doing what the superconnectors did. We can work towards matching and aligning where somebody is. And these are a couple just general techniques about matching someone, but I want to first call out just some really important notes here. There are lots of situations where you won't use some of these methods. Some examples. Somebody comes to you and they're in a rage, right? You're not going to want to match somebody in a rage. Maybe someone's in having a trauma experience. You're not going to want to also match a trauma experience. So it's just, I think, really important to call out as we work towards aligning where someone is. Sometimes we're not going to. Sometimes we're not going to do that. But if we were to do it, if it's a case where, hey, someone's coming to us, it's a situation where alignment feels needed, these are some ways that the book and some of the studies say that you can really start to align your brain patterns, align your heart patterns, as those superconnectors did. One's called verbal mirroring. This idea is just that if somebody's using specific words, hey, I need to resolve this, and you might match the phrasing. Okay, yeah, how can we fix this? I've got some ideas on how we can fix this. Just this simple matching of words can help us align. Sentence length. The book states that, yeah, this is a way we can match as well. If somebody's got like a really short sentence and you have a really long reply, that is a mismatch. And so this can be something to think about when you're having a conversation. Might be simple, but could be a lot of these little things can go a long way in matching, in that alignment, so you can get to that point of a deeper connection. Nonverbal alignment. This might be this is kind of body language, perhaps. Maybe a moving of the hands, maybe just a nodding of the head, aligning with where people are with basic and subtle movements is another way. Speech pace. Somebody's talking quickly, somebody's talking slowly. If you're out of alignment here, yeah, that can be one way to maybe to not be matched up. This is one where I'd call out, though, that if someone's really high energy, this is one of those times where it's like you maybe need to use your intuition or just think about if it's a right choice to do this or not, right? Because somebody might be high speaking really fast, and having a grounded, slow voice might be what they need. But the book states this is one of the ways you can align. And then lastly, I kind of touched on it just a little a moment ago, but if somebody's high energy, they're excited, right? Maybe matching that excitement can be a really awesome way to align with them. But again, these two at the bottom here, it's a choice that you want to look into and be aware of. If somebody's really angry, they've got a really rageful energy, probably not a good idea to try to align with that. But if we were to go into more specifics around directly matching a mindset, once we become aware of where they are by asking them, by just checking in, hey, what are you looking for here? This is just some additional information on how you might do it. So in that practical conversation, you might be presenting options, right? You might be framing things with timelines or summarizing, hey, this is what I heard. This is what I think we could do about it. You might, hey, what's important here? How about we do this? Are you looking for some advice? And can I give you some ideas on that? Emotional conversations. We'll go into a little bit more detail, but I think it's really important, especially these days, about sharing our emotions and being okay to share our emotions and encouraging others to do that. And when it comes to emotional conversations, of course, we want to name what's coming up for us. We might want to match where they are. If somebody's feeling down, you could match them there and be like, man, that sounds really tough. And then, of course, when it comes to emotional conversations, validation, really important. It makes sense why you might feel that way. What I'm hearing is X, and that sounds like you're hurt. The last one I love, how long have you been sitting with this? I think it's really also important to call out, when we're talking about emotional conversations, the idea of empathy. And I know for me, empathy is a little tough at times, but I think one of the call-outs I just want to make here is that while we might not be able to know exactly what someone is feeling, it's a great practice to try to get to a place where, you know what, I don't know exactly what you're feeling, but I have felt frustrated before, and I know what that's like. And I think that's a really important call out when we're talking about feeling conversations. And then the last one, around kind of more of the social conversations, we will typically use us and we and our, because we are talking about groups, we're talking about identity. And this one I think is really important when it comes to having difficult conversations. And I've got a couple about this later, but you might have conversations or sentences around, hey, how does this reflect on us as a group who believes X? What does this mean to you that your family typically does things this way? And it's kind of more of that, as I said before, some of that tribal language. All right, any thoughts or questions before I kind of move on here? I'd like to take a quick pause. Okay, no worries. Let's move along into some of the ways that we can, further align with people, further understand. So this technique, looping for understanding, I found very fascinating. To me, this is very similar to what is known as the Imago dialogue, if you have heard of that. And Imago dialogue is, I'm pretty sure it was designed for kind of relationships, but also just being able to be understood and heard. And in this dialogue, it's basically a process around, I want to mirror what you said, I want to validate what you said, and I want to give you empathy. And I think while that's really powerful, this kind of dialogue is very structured, and to me it can be a little rigid. And when I've tried to work on this myself, I've been wondering if I'm getting it right. And I feel like this concept, looping for understanding, is very similar, but a little easier to get through. And so it's a very straightforward process. And it's very similar to that dialogue I just mentioned, but it's one, I'm just gonna listen to you. I'm gonna try to understand while you're talking. I'm gonna try to listen best I can. And then I'm gonna reflect what someone is saying. Hey, what I'm hearing is this, is that right? That's the third step. Did I get you right? And then the cycle repeats. If they say, yes, that's it, great, you got it. And if not, you can say, okay, can I ask more questions? Can you tell me more? And while this might seem very simple, I feel like it is very powerful in one case, because to me, this is very relaxed. It can be done in your own way, in your own voice, in the way that is coming up for you in the moment. It encourages you to listen. And when we follow these steps, studies have shown that it reduces miscommunication by 34% there. And I think, wow, if we could reduce miscommunication by that much, that to me sounds like a lot. And I know in my life, I've had a bunch of conversations where I have felt misunderstood. I know there's been many conversations where I've misunderstood other people. And man, if I could increase understanding and reduce miscommunication by that much, I think that's just such a powerful thing. And so, again, very kind of maybe perhaps what could be considered a simple process, but again, can be really, really, really powerful. We'll go into a little more detail on this one as well. And kind of closing out the kind of the slides and session with a little bit from the book, and then we'll go into the how this aligns to difficult conversations. But the book states that there are what's called 4 rules or 4 pillars for a learning conversation, where we're being curious, we're trying to understand, we're using things like looping for understanding. And these might seem like they align to some of those mindsets, those 3 mindsets I mentioned earlier, but the idea here of these is to use some of these steps and methods to navigate conversations. And this might help you find a mindset that someone's in. This might help you better align on what you want out of a conversation. So yeah, again, the idea here is that these 4 pillars can be used at any point in any conversation to deepen understanding, to help navigate a conversation, to help get to a place where you're both feeling understood and heard, if that's what you're looking for. All right. And so the 4 pillars are, 1, we just talked about it. That is being aware of the mindset that someone is in and matching it. That can be one of the best ways to have a learning conversation, right? You can ask, hey, what are you looking for here, as we've said? And you can align where you are, both on the mindset itself and the style and language of that mindset, but also in some of those other ways we talked about by matching energy, if that's relevant, things like that. 2 is creating a shared purpose. I think this is really important. I think for so many conversations, we just get into them and we don't really know why we're having them. And each of these we'll go into in a little more detail. Discussing feelings. This, again, might align to one of those mindsets, the emotional one, but when we're in any conversation, discussing feelings can be really important, especially when it comes to having difficult conversations. And then last, exploring identity. So as I mentioned, as part of those mindsets, this is not just aligning with that mindset itself, but this is challenging us to have identity-based conversations when relevant, and to really explore what this means. Because as I said in the beginning, we are often told that if somebody is X, we should disown them, we should not talk to them. And I very much disagree with that. So what does this look like for each of these in a little more detail? Matching the mindset. We just went over this, right? We're going to try to identify it, be aware of it. We're gonna maybe observe where someone is. We're going to try to notice, hey, what are they doing? What are the questions they asking? What language are they using? We're going to ask, hey, sounds like you're sharing some emotions here, and maybe you just want me to listen. Totally. And then we're going to maybe use some of those matching techniques. We might do that general matching when it's appropriate, and we might do some of that direct matching using the structure and the language of the mindset. But getting into a little more detail around these, creating a shared purpose. This, I think, is just so important, right? We often start conversations out, we just jump in. And I know when it comes to difficult conversations, we often, and I can speak for myself, instead of using the general we, I will jump in and being like, no, you're wrong, right? And that does not create the groundwork for a healthy conversation. And so you might want to ask directly, hey, what are you trying to get out of this? And more importantly, what you're trying to get out of it, right? Hey, I know we're starting a conversation here, or maybe we just started one. But I'm really trying here, one of my goals is to just really understand you and understand where you're coming from. And what about you? And just can be a really powerful way. And I used this literally this week, and it was magic. It really worked, because before things got off the rails, we could actually go back and say, oh, hey, we agreed that we were trying to do this, and can we be aligned on that? Surfacing feelings. I think this is, the idea of emotional intelligence and, getting really close to our own feelings and sharing them out is just becoming more and more popular. And I think this is just of course, great way to deepen a conversation, to get closer, right? We might want to listen for some of those cues. We might want to look for the body language. But when it comes to having a deep conversation, encouraging the sharing and surfacing of emotions can be incredibly powerful. And if someone's sharing with you, of course, we want to validate, we want to hear, we don't want to fix, right? That gets back to some of the alignment we were talking about before. And where, yes, we want to maybe listen and say, wow, hey, I'm not sure if I've been there before, but I've felt pain like that before, and I'm with you. And inviting that depth. And I think when I talk about the idea of leadership and connection, we can really lead with this. We can say we can share our own emotions and invite that depth. And this can be a fantastic way to build connection in a conversation. And so some basics around this, hey, yes, I'm hearing that you might be frustrated. Validating, as I said before, that makes sense to me because, yes, I've been in a situation like that as well. And I think I'd be pretty upset too. And then going deeper, right? Inviting that depth. Is there more here? What is that like? What does that mean to you? And I think, as I said before, just modeling some of these behaviors, modeling the sharing of emotions can just be really powerful, and that can encourage people to do the same. And then as we close out the 4 pillars, and I think this one's incredibly important, especially these days. And it starts out with the idea that 68% of conflicts, one study says, are about identity. As a parent, I feel this. I feel like what happened violates our team's values. And so identity is such a deep and complex thing. And I feel like these days, I mentioned it a little bit earlier, while we have so many components that make up our identity, if just one of those doesn't align with someone else's belief these days, we're encouraged in so many places to disown, to disconnect. When in fact, we likely, because we have so many different complex identities and what makes us who we are, we actually probably have more overlap than we really know and are told to believe, right? I'll give you a few examples. Right? Some of my identities. I believe very much in the idea of human rights and the idea that people need to be treated with dignity and respect and care, right? It's like part of my identity. It's part of my strong beliefs. I also, I grew up in a divorced family. I was raised with 2 different religions. I was raised on one side Catholic and on the other side practicing Jehovah's Witnesses. And I have very strong beliefs about religion. I now consider myself spiritual, but not religious. But I don't judge anybody else's beliefs. It's, hey, whatever works for you is great for me. But that makes up a lot of my beliefs and identity. And just some examples there. And so there is so much to uncover here. We all have so many different identities, not just one defines us. This is so important to remember. I feel like we need to confront the assumption that one single thing defines us. Again, this is what we're kind of told, hey, if they're this, it means Y. It's something I really want to work to break this cycle. Encourage these conversations. This can be really tough, I think. But when something like this comes up and it's, we might say, oh, you believe this, so I'm making up an assumption about you. Encouraging these types of conversations, being able to go a little deeper on these and not being afraid. This can be tough at times, but I feel like we need this more than ever. And as I said, we have so many areas of overlap of identity and common ground, yet I think there's, again, so many things, leadership, social media, the media encourages us to just focus on one thing, and that is just not the case. And lastly, before I just get into a few moments around how this applies to difficult conversations, I really want to call out this book is great. And it talks about the idea of people being super communicators and super connectors and being the one to do the connecting. But I think with this new knowledge, it's really important to call out that we can advocate for ourselves. We can say, hey, I'm going to start a conversation. We can go up to somebody and say, hey, I'm really struggling right now. Can I share my feelings and can you just listen? Can you just hear me? Right? With this new knowledge, we can help people align to us. And I think that's really powerful in itself. And the book doesn't really go into much of that, but I think this is really something to call out. You might say, hey, you could practice the looping for understanding concept. You could say, hey, would you mind playing that back for me so I can make sure that I'm saying it how I think? Right? You can encourage other people to align with you. You don't always have to be the one to do the aligning. And I think that's something that can be really powerful and another leadership component in itself. All right. And as we get towards the kind of final part of the slides in the session here, just how does this align to difficult conversations? Well, one I think is really important, and this is kind of a bit outside the book. This is some of my own thinking, but I think it's really important to just acknowledge that conflict exists. I think one of the things we're told is like, hey, avoid conflict. And yes, this can be really tough. This can be a lot of internal work. I grew up avoiding conflict and being told to not talk about my feelings and not to engage in conflict. But this is, of course, a natural part of our lives. It's a natural part of everyone we speak to. It's going to come up. We are human beings. And I encourage and challenge almost the idea that conflict's going to happen. Let's call it out. It's okay. And we can manage it. We can build the muscle of coming up in these situations and being able to navigate them, hopefully using some of these things that we talked about today. Identity. I think this one, yes, this one has just really been speaking to me today. Our identities are vast and complex. I've probably mentioned it too many times today. There is so much manipulation and encouragement of negative behaviors out there that are telling us all of the things I said previously, to disconnect. If somebody believes X, if they're a Democrat, disown them. If they're a Republican, don't talk to them. And of course, the one identity does not define your entirety as you as a person. And so just a double down on this. We can engage in these conversations, and I feel like it's a huge area of growth. It's probably going to be tough, but we've been trained to disregard this. And I think there's just so much opportunity in saying, oh, wow, you have 6 siblings. Yeah, me too. It could be as basic as that. And encouraging going deeper than that first area of identity where you might hit a wall. And just the reminder and knowing that underneath that one thing, there's probably a lot that you actually have a ton of overlap on. Aligning on goals. I think this one's huge. Getting clear on what you want out of a conversation. Again, I hop into so many conversations being like, oh man, they're so wrong. I got to tell them why they're wrong. That is not a good way to start a conversation. I've learned, but I still do it. Trying to prove that you are right, that your idea is the right one, is not a good ground for a healthy and connective and ongoing conversation. And as I said before, a great example, and I used this literally this week. I said, hey, this is feeling a little tough, but I really want to understand you. I want to know how you got to believe this. And I don't agree with, I think, what your belief is, but I want to know how you came to that point. And maybe that is an area underneath of connection. And curiosity is just so helpful here. And this can be tough to break down our tendency to say, wow, you are so wrong. This is so wrong. And you might really believe that. And there's so much opportunity in just trying to understand. And you might still disagree in the end, of course, but you might, through that, find some areas of alignment. And so starting that off with, hey, I just whatever your goal is, and I think getting really clear on what you want in life and in conversations can be a great way to do that. To find some common ground, to find a way to start out conversations where you're both aligned, where you can agree, and then if things start to get difficult, you can go back to that agreement you made. Looping. Oh man. So I know I've come to conversations being like, oh, I'm being curious, but actually I'm being really sarcastic. I'm being really like, oh, well, so if I hear you right, you believe X, just being really snide and really sarcastic, right? I believe just trying to understand can lead to so much common ground. Even if you still disagree, you can make connections that last. So that, for example, in this person that I've been talking about having a conversation with, several times throughout our conversation, he was like, you know what, I don't want to talk to you anymore, have a good life. And I said, oh, okay, that's fine. And I just wanted to understand you. And if I got you wrong, I apologize, but I genuinely want to understand where you're coming from. And they came back to the table. I tried this a little more. He said, no, that's not it. I asked a few more questions, and then he really opened up. And now we're going to actually meet in person. And I feel like that's a massive win. This person who has hugely, drastically different beliefs than me, but I think we can still have a connection, and I'm open to that. And just, again, following up with curiosity, right? How did you get to that belief? How did you get to that thinking? And how they got there might be actually another place of alignment. And then our last one here. I said it before. We can be leaders in servicing feelings. It can also help to diffuse a difficult conversation. You know, things get tense very quickly. And just the simple fact of, or the simple statement of saying, hey, I'm feeling a little tense here. I'm getting a little tight. I'm feeling a little agitated. I'm feeling that. And yeah, this might not be the case for you, but maybe and for my case, it would be like, hey, I'm feeling this and I still want to keep talking. Where are you? How are you feeling? It can be a really excellent anchor in terms of diffusing a situation, getting back to some of the original agreements that you made around what you want out of the conversation, and can just be another great way of connection. So as we close out, how can we practice? This was a lot of information very quickly. And I try to keep this simple because the book has a lot of information, a lot of things that you could practice. But I try to break it down in a simple way, but it still can be a lot. We just went through a lot in a short time. So I suggest, if you want to try this, just trying one thing at a time. Try to become aware of mindsets. Right now that you have this new knowledge, you might go out and see people talking. You might be with friends, and you might just observe and say, "Oh man, they seem to be in an emotional conversation right now," and that insight alone can be incredibly powerful. Looping for understanding. I have literally been trying this for the last few weeks, and it's very simple, but it has been great. It helped me with this conversation with this person I just talked about. I've used it with my partner, and it has been really helpful for me to, instead of assuming where someone is, to be like, hey, so if I get you right, this is where you are. And they say, yeah. And that alone, that simple thing alone can be very powerful. That at least has been for me. You might just try when you start a conversation about anything, with anyone. Hey, I'm hoping to get this out of this. What are you trying to get out of this? Is there anything you're trying to get out of this? What would make this conversation great for you? And I think that can just be a huge area of depth and connection. And the last thing I always say is, if you feel called to any of this stuff, if you liked any of this stuff, share it with somebody, someone at work, a family member, a partner, a colleague. Hey, I learned about this concept. I'd like to give it a try for a few weeks. And let them know, and maybe they can practice with you. And just the idea of sharing this and sharing some learnings, if it called to you or not, can be really powerful and just another way to practice things. All right, and so as I said, we've got some, I got some more resources that I create. This is one of the things I love to do. So I created a resource guide that kind of goes through all of this. And it also gives some other ways that you can practice a lot of this stuff. Some ways that you can say, okay, today I'm going to try to do this with looping for understanding. And I love this idea where we can, yes, the books and things like that can be great concepts, but I feel like when we really just try to practice these things, that's where the magic happens. That's where we can see some of the change, and where we can be leaders. We can, and leadership doesn't have to mean I'm running an organization or running a team, but I can be a leader in strong, connected, and deep communication that helps to bridge gaps. And I think that's really powerful, as I've said. So that will be part of what I share at the end. And afterwards, actually, I usually do it a couple days after. So that is it. Thank you for listening. Let me shut some of this recording off, and we can have a brief conversation or have questions about this. But